God command murder? Fourth, God wishes to provide Israel with Lebensraum, so he leads them into a land of temptation and removes the temptation by commanding the elimination of the land's inhabitants. It seems not to have succeeded very well if we judge by repeated subsequent prophetic condemnations of Israel. But after the events of the Exodus, did the Israelites, if they were corrigible at all, really need, at the expense of innocence, another shattering demonstration that they were a people set apart? Fifth, either cultural determinism is true, in which case the Canaanite children could not have been held responsible for growing into corrupt adult Canaanites, or else it's false, in which case God could have provided them with guidance and opportunity to transform Canaanite culture. Killing children in horrific ways, then making it up to them in heaven, is unjust in the same way that kidnapping and maiming an innocent person to achieve some extraneous end, and then making it up to her, would be. The rationale that the children must be killed because they would have grown into sinful adults is all too reminiscent of the rationale given by the wife of the U.S. Commissioner of Immigration in 1939 for rejecting a bill to provide temporary haven in the U.S. for 20,000 Jewish children from Germany. Her rationale was 20,000 charming children would all too soon grow into 20,000 ugly adults. The bill was defeated in Congress. I, for one, find Craig's justification of the harem against Canaan altogether chilling. Christians, especially those attracted to dispensationalism, may find some comfort in thinking that the morally chaotic Tanakh is superseded by the New Testament. They should not rest easy. I have already alluded briefly to some unsavory aspects of New Testament moral teaching. Moreover, dispensationalism is itself a view that is difficult to defend. There's no plausible reason why God could not have and should not have taught Israel at least the fundamental moral truths from the beginning. Furthermore, even early Christian moral qualms about the Tanakh do nothing to mitigate the problematic status of the Tanakh as an expression of God's will, or the fact that Christians gave material support to propagating it. Focusing blame on the Tanakh also runs the risk of violating one of Jesus' wiser teachings, namely not to seek to remove the mote from our neighbor's eye before extracting the beam from our own. Surely the Tanakhic horrors are no mote, but the Christian story of salvation contains much that is not free from moral danger. At the core of Christian soteriology lie four doctrines textually supported by the New Testament and deeply rooted in Judaism that are morally incoherent, psychologically demoralizing, and practically dysfunctional. The doctrines of Christian exclusivism, of eternal damnation, of original sin, and of vicarious atonement. I'll focus my brief remarks here upon vicarious atonement. Substitution theories of vicarious atonement must do three things: explain how sin creates an obligation that is transferable, can be met on one's behalf by someone else, explain why that debt is beyond the sinner's means to pay, and explain how the cross can discharge that obligation. All such theories founder, as I see it, upon two rocks: the moral impossibility of justly transferring punishment and thereby extinguishing culpability, and the notion that the voluntary death of a uniquely good, even divine, individual can somehow satisfy the debt. As David Lewis points out, even atheists swallow penal substitution where someone pays a court-imposed fine for another. But intuitions about satisfaction of a legal penalty do not match those regarding moral guilt. If a sinner owes more than he can repay or deserves punishment, and simple forgiveness won't answer because it doesn't take the sin seriously or view the sinner as properly responsible, God's paying the debt does so even less. And however poignant the sacrifice of another on our behalf, we should be mortified to accept that offer. Would it not compound our guilt? The other popular theme in modern atonement theories is exemplarist. Theories in which Christ as moral exemplar is central face two different difficulties. They can't explain at all, in the face of evident failure of Christians to achieve moral superiority over others, how Jesus makes an incomparable contribution to our sanctification. And they can't explain why Jesus' example is somehow necessary, or why that example must include death on the cross. The cross might be thought causally necessary to bring about the change of heart that transforms the sinner from rebel to penitent. But that psychological claim is not borne out by reality. Sincere remorse and desire to make amends for an acknowledged offense are capacities human beings often exercise without prompting. Jews certainly do not imagine that they need Jesus to put themselves into this frame of mind toward God. They have Yom Kippur. I see no reason to think their repentance less sincere or less morally adequate than Christians. The doctrine of vicarious atonement can certainly be distinguished from the horrors of the Tanakh, though I believe its baneful effects upon the moral psychology of Christians can easily be underestimated. At the least, a testament that portrays God as offering human beings salvation exclusively by as morally impenetrable a mechanism as the cross offers a portrait of a God who appears not morally up to speed. Given the absence, to my knowledge, of evidence showing that Christians taken collectively are ethically superior to non-Christians, and given the apparent incoherence of the Christian view of atonement, it's hard to see what is morally attractive about Christian soteriology. What sensible story can be told about the moral consequences of sin to show that we owe God something both beyond our capacity to repay and for which only the passion could make amends? The cross mediates between divine love and justice only by divine self-immolation and adding one more sin to Israel's already long list. The central moral feature of sin is moral responsibility. That is not something that can be transferred to another. Were I offered the salvation of the cross, I would respectfully decline. I should take more seriously Paul's trenchant advice to the Philippians to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Rachels argues that worship is incompatible with human moral autonomy, hence no being is worthy of worship. Responding to Rachels, Quinn brings matters to a head by proposing that a theist can rationally believe it more likely that she's been commanded by God to perform an apparently heinous action A than that A is morally forbidden. When God told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, Abraham might have had sufficient evidence to justify belief that God had indeed so commanded, even if that meant taking an innocent life. Two things are initially striking about this response. First, Quinn appeals to utilitarian considerations to explain how killing Isaac might, after all, be justified. Yet it takes a strong consequentialist spine to resist accepting a deontological argument, to resist accepting a deontological argument of wrongness in such a case. What's worse, the story gives us, and Abraham, no reason whatever to think that Isaac's sacrifice will engender more good than ill, or that it's a necessary condition for an optimal outcome. On the contrary, what Abraham must accept is not only the expected loss of his son, but God's vacating his prior promise to provide Abraham, through Isaac, with descendants as numerous as the stars. Even setting all that aside, it's at least jarring to find a theist suggesting a utilitarian solution to the problem. Christians have good reason to abjure utilitarianism. The second striking feature is that Quinn's response makes a much stronger claim than his argument requires. For Abraham need not have any reason so strong as to require overthrowing the moral principle not to murder to discover a justification for obeying God. All that's required is A, that his moral principle is defeasible and imposes only a prima facie duty, and B, that this duty is overridden by a duty to obey God. Of course, Abraham must wonder why God would command something that overrides a strong prima facie moral duty. But whatever God's reasons are, it's not obvious that they entail God's being committed to abrogating the sixth commandment.